bantamweights looking for the respective first UFC wins. We have the man in his UFC debut. It's Ferocious Farid Basharat taking on the Monster. He was the Diamond before. Damon Blackshear, the former CFFC champ. He made it into the UFC on incredibly short notice. Took on Yusuf Zalal. Beat him for 2 rounds. And then in the third round, it was a 10-8 for Yusuf Zalal. It ends up as a draw. Zalal's out of the UFC, but we're hanging on to Blackshear, and I'm really glad we did. I was really, really excited for his UFC debut, because as I told the story before, Blackshear was in the main event of the first MMA show that I ever covered back in Maine. It was NEF 34, Home of the Brave. He fought Aaron Lacey, who was kind of a hometown guy. He was a home state guy because he was fighting out of Brewer down in Portland. Blackshear beat him on all 3 scorecards, 30-27. He's the type of guy that's going to close the distance with some really crisp striking. He's one of the taller, lankier, rangy guys that you're going to find in the bantamweight division. He goes out there, utilizes wrestling to the nth degree. And if you consider it on Blackshear's record, and I saw people out there in the comments section, they were snickering before his fight with Zalal. They said, wow, he lost to Chris Mutino. But go through the names on Blackshear's record. He beat Tony Gravely as an amateur. He lost to Tony Gravely as an amateur. He lost to Keith Richardson when Blackshear was 4-0, and Richardson was 16-9. So
experience.
A little bit of a tough fight. Oh yeah, and it was a split decision loss. Lost to Chris Mutino, lost to Pat Sabatini by decision, and a loss to Danny Sabatello in a fight for the Titan Bantamweight champion. And the last time I checked, Danny Sabatello just had a title fight over with Bellator against Raufeon Stotts, a high-level fighter. So for Blackshear, it's definitely there in terms of the names on his record, in terms of the competition that he's beat as well, because he's got a win by decision over the Canadian and Matteo Vogel, DeAndre Anderson, Josh Smith. That was another really good win. So for Blackshear, wave of confidence coming into this fight out of Jackson Wink MMA, and it's going to be great to have that Jackson Wink camp maybe a little more focused, and maybe the shine and all the conversations around John Jones on this card, and Damon Blackshear can go in there on a full camp, getting ready for his first real gritty fight week with the UFC, taking on a tough competitor in the UFC debuting Farid Basharat.
That's why I'm surprised that they gave Blackshear this opponent, because he is a prospect with quite a bit of promise who was given a tough matchup his last time out on short notice. Normally the UFC does you a bit of a favor your next time out.
Especially with how he looked in that fight.
Yeah. Now you fight Farid Basharat, who's a real MFer to deal with across the board. Basharat is an incredible striker, and the brothers don't fight in the exact same way, but there are quite a few similarities between the two of them. They both have that striking to submission ability. They don't necessarily have the wrestling pillar in their game, but when you talk about finishing ability on the feet and on the ground, Farid Basharat represents that, and I'll be very curious to see how Blackshear deals with some of the counter-striking of Basharat, because Blackshear's a guy who will move forward, whether it is with his striking or his grappling, and I think he could run into some problems if he does find himself really rushing in, because if he does rush in and not set it up behind the jab, or at least threaten it up with the takedown, Farid Basharat's going to have a field day striking moving backwards, because he is a striker who is at the level where he can move backwards, move forward, left or right. He can find the shots he needs.
The weird thing about Farid Basharat, Javid does it, but Farid does it to the nth degree. Farid's a guy that can strike very well in the back foot. You don't see that a ton in MMA. He's not the type of guy that leaves his chin high. He'll exit on angles, and his defensive takedown, or his takedown defense, is really, really good in a lot of these fights. And for Basharat, I can say this about him. Now, in his career, he hasn't taken on the same level of competition as Blackshear. They threw the graphic up there ahead of Blackshear's debut into the UFC. I added to it and just threw the numbers down to try and make a little bit of sense out of this. His combined opponent's record, 108-53-1 for Blackshear. If you look at it for Basharat, 36-20-2. So not the same level of competition for both of these guys. Obviously for Basharat, only 3 wins by decision. He's got plenty of submissions. The records are kind of similar in that way. A lot of submissions for both guys. Rear naked chokes abound for both guys. If you look at it for Blackshear, he's got, 5 wins by rear naked choke. But for Basharat, even against good fighters, like when he took on Elenen Kumalala over with Octagon, in that fight, you can go watch it on YouTube. I mean, he beats that poor man pillar to post, and he's still a newer fighter into MMA. You look at Basharat's fight against Alan Bagoso, that was one of those quasi-main events. It's still 3 rounds over Dana White's Contender Series. Basharat looked really, really good in that fight as well. 4-0 as an amateur, 9-0 as a pro, and he's training at Extreme Couture right now with Merab Dvalishvili, his brother Javid, Amir Al-Bazi. I mean, those guys are going to get you ready for somebody like Blackshear for sure.
And that's the problem that I keep on running into. I don't doubt that Blackshear can have success, but when you break down what both guys really excel at with their skill sets, Basharat does have the counter for a lot of what Blackshear is able to do offensively.
Yeah, and I have a quick look at the odds. Farid Basharat is a giant favorite in the matchup, making his UFC debut. We're going to have a look at the Topology votes. Surprise to us as they are to you. I'm going to say, I mean, if the odds are that way, I'm going to say over under 72.5% Basharat.
I think they'll be over.
They're going to be over 92% out of 1,406 total votes have Basharat to get the win. And I think Damon Blackshear goes out there and beats him in the first 2 rounds, and Blackshear goes out there and wins the decision in this matchup. I love Farid Basharat. I think he's a much more dynamic striker. He cuts better angles. He throws power shots from different positions and from different stances as well. But when I look at it, and I look at it defending takedowns against some lesser level wrestlers compared to a guy like Blackshear, I like Blackshear on a full camp. Again, that fight that he had his last time out was on very, very short notice. 10 days notice, replacing Christian Quinones against Yusuf Salal, guy who can wrestle a little bit in his own right. And then if you consider it, I mean, you look at the CFFC bantamweight title lineage, I'm not saying Blackshear is Aljamain Sterling or Jimmy Rivera. However, Blackshear's beat much better and tougher competition. I think his boxing is competent in a matchup like this, and I think he has a leg up with his wrestling against Farid Basharat.
I think he has a leg up with his wrestling. I just think he's going to eat a lot of shots on his way in, trying to get to those wrestling positions. And I think for that reason, the damage is going to favor Basharat. That's why I do have to pick him. I just think Blackshear's going to eat a lot of shots going for the things that could give him success. Now, could Blackshear end up getting into dominant positions off of some of those entries? Of course he could. I just think the counter-striking of Basharat's going to give Blackshear some troubles on the outside, and that's why I do have Basharat.
We're split on the pick in the matchup. I'm going to go with Jackson Winks, Damon Blackshear, Matt going with Extreme Couture's Farid Basharat. Let us know down below in the comment section who you have in the matchup. Some great fights on this card. 2 title fights up the top, flyweight and heavyweight gold up for grabs. Some great ones. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.